somehow get a blue shirt, and I'm going to be in that blue shirt contingent tonight, and then see what I can do about getting into a parade tomorrow. So I have made good use of my time here. Announcements. Okay, so where is the other microphone? The other microphone is right there. Right, goes to. There we go.
I saw a PBS special about Pete Seeger, and if you haven't, I got it at the library. And I have no idea what an awesome man he is. He should be on the $20 bill. But you ought to go get that, or maybe you can get it some other way, but it's at the library, PBS, Pete Seeger.
There you go.
Posthumous Nobel Peace Prize for Pete Seeger.
They don't do that. They only do it for living people. They don't do it for people who are already dead. It's really kind of sad. Any other announcements that we have? Yes.
I'll mention this.
Martha.
I'll mention this again next week, but if you wish to write it down or something, on July 15th, United We Stand is throwing a cookout at Sharon Woods that afternoon. And you're supposed to bring a potluck dish, but that should be a whole lot of fun. You can Google it, just United We Stand Cookout. There's a whole page devoted to this. I'm looking forward to meeting people that were on the Women's March that I've dealt with them online for several years and never met them. So I hope that'll be a lot of fun.
There you go.
Repeat, July 15th.
July 15th.
I believe it's
Now, who do we have taking notes for today?
p.m.
Who's taking notes for today for Peter Rose, who is not able to be here? His wife is having a special procedure today. He can't be here. Ooh la la.
3 to 6, I believe.
3 to 6 on July 15th.
Sharon Wood.
Thank you.
So Mike, you're the one who's taking notes for Peter?
No, I'm taking notes for me.
Oh, you're going to take notes and you give them to write them down?
You don't want my notes. Somebody write them down.
We need somebody's notes. Whose notes are we going to have? Okay, go ahead. Dick.
So I'm pleased to announce that I will be moderating the class at OLLI.
Ooh.
That's Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It doesn't start until September. Now, I know this is going to preclude most of us because you have to be at least 55 years of age to class. So it'll be beginning in September. I'm really excited about it. I hope you will be too. And I'll have flyers out when we get closer to the time.
What's the name of the class?
Something about getting big money out of politics. It's probably getting the corrupting influence out of big money out of politics. That's kind of
Sounds
my
like
standard line. It covers the whole
my
thing.
kind of course. Go for it, Dick.
I've got one.
There we go. Bonnie. With no name tag today.
Oh, I haven't put it on yet. Anyway, I had to do a way roundabout way to get here today because all the train tracks are blocked. Nice. Anyway, I'm on the committee for the Earth Day Coalition for Earth Day at Summit Park, and they're looking for board members. It's not a high profile position. I mean, it's pretty low key, but they're looking for board members. So if anyone is interested in working on Earth Day, see me. Thank you.
April 22nd for next year.
Is that what it is?
Yep.
I just go. Well,
just goes.
I'm actually even working on getting more participants. So, like exhibitors.
There you go. Okay.
So.
Any other announcements? Oh, I love it.
I'm Dave, asking about Moms Demand Action, a really super active group for sensible gun legislation. Their next meeting, Saturday 1:30 at St. John's in Clifton on Reeser off Clifton Avenue. If you have any questions, please contact me later. Thank you.
There you go. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker for today is William Messer. He's a photographer, curator, and critic, and educator who's also an environmentalist and a First Amendment activist, particularly in the areas of freedom of expression and separation of government and religion. In the early 1990s, he founded the Campaign Against Censorship in the Arts, CACA, and has served on the state board of the American Civil Liberties Union. From 2010 to 2013, he chaired the food task team of the Green Cincinnati Plan for nearly a decade on the City of Cincinnati's Environmental Advisory Council. He currently serves on the Green Umbrella Transportation Task Team, and for more than a decade has worked to create inexpensive pedestrian and bicycle funiculars for the city's hillsides, accomplishing their inclusion in the Plan Cincinnati, the city's 2012 comprehensive Played by the Future as a mid-range goal 4 to 7, but this is no action has been taken since then. Wonder what that means. He has been attending our GCM luncheon since the first one. His topic today is saving the planet with your fork. The climate cost of meat. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, William Messer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was my Elvis Presley imitation. That's all I'm going to do. By the way, I did join the EarthSave, I believe, the board. I went to the last meeting and volunteered to serve on the board. So I do encourage, not EarthSave, but Earth Day. Earth Day. Aha, you're showing the ears, which means you're not hearing me. Okay. So I had a public speaking teacher in high school who told me the one thing you should never do is begin a talk with an apology. So I'm beginning with 3 apologies. I didn't actually know for certain that I was to do this until last week's luncheon here. So I was still up at 3 in the morning finishing writing this. My computer does not like talking to my printer anymore, so I want to thank Ann Zavon, who's sitting right here, for having printed them out for me when he woke up this morning, printed out the talk. The reason that's important is because I had a traumatic brain injury some time ago, and I lost my ability to just organize things in my head well. And so I can't really do stand-up speaking off the cuff the way I used to be able to. I really need to write it all down and read it, so I apologize for that. Apology number 2. And I'm sure I have one more apology. Also, because of that organizational problem, it's likely that I'll repeat myself more than once in this whole thing, so bear with me. I think that's, and finally, for those of you who were cuts up sometimes without touching it, who were expecting me to tell you all the different ways that you can lower your climate footprint, there was a little miscommunication. I'm merely going to be speaking about one specific, nonetheless quite important aspect of that. So as you heard, my topic and title are Saving the Planet with Your Fork, the Climate Cost of Meat. So first some background. In 2006, newly elected Mayor Mark Mallory kept one of his campaign promises, which was to resurrect the city's Office of Environmental Management, which was then named the Office of Environmental Quality. And from Kansas City Environment Officer Larry Falcon was hired to direct it. Then in 2007, after attending a mayor's conference somewhere, Mayor Mallory decided Cincinnati should have a climate protection action plan. So an open call went out to people to participate, and nearly 200 people formed into 5 action teams to develop the plan. Those were advocacy, energy, land use, transportation, and waste. I joined transportation and started researching the potential greenhouse gas reduction impact of a locavore recommendation. That is, obtaining as much of our food as possible within, say, 75 miles of Cincinnati. It didn't get much traction from the other members. And additionally, I found counterintuitively, the distance didn't always equate to a lower carbon footprint. Strawberries, for example, obtained from somewhere like Chile in the winter, transported on container ships, actually have a lower carbon impact than those grown in greenhouses 50 miles away and driven to Cincinnati in bushels in the back of a pickup truck. So I went off on my own to look more deeply into the relationship of food and the environment. I was already familiar with John Robbins' 1987 book, Diet for a New America, which detailed some of these issues. Then in 2002, the environmental magazine E! Published a surprising January issue with a cover that read, in all caps, "So you're an environmentalist? Why are you still eating meat?" So by 2007, I was already somewhat woke and on these issues. I discovered that just a year earlier, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization had published a report entitled Livestock's Long Shadow, which calculated the contributions to climate of many sectors of human activity. So it found, for example, that buildings contribute 8% of the anthropogenic, which means human-caused, anthropogenic greenhouse gases on the planet. Transportation, my former task team, contributes 12%. That's all the trucks, cars, buses, trains, ships, 12%. The relatively new information, which surprised many people, was the contribution of meat, which the report calculated at 18%, nearly twice the other two sectors combined. One person who wasn't surprised was Rajendra Pachauri, the chair of the UN's Nobel Prize-winning Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He disagreed with the report's findings. He said the figure for meat should be 2 to 3 times as much. And he asserted that the most effective action human beings can take to slow climate change is to simply eat less of it. He wasn't paid attention to much at the time. I spent several months looking into the climate impact of meat production, then submitted what I called the Meat Consumption Reduction Recommendation. I spoke to meetings of the Climate Protection Action Plan drafters to say, we have to include meat in our considerations. Remember, at this point, there was no task team for food. Larry Falcon remembers he and everyone else thought I was pretty much a nut job. When he read the actual recommendation, which merely recommends a 15% reduction in meat and dairy consumption, which is the equivalent of a meatless Monday, he checked my cited studies, he checked my calculations, and decided not only was I right, but he testified to the committee that this lone food recommendation, which was dubbed F1, would have greater climate impact than any of the 80-plus other recommendations in the Climate Protection Action Plan, short of Duke Energy ceasing to use coal altogether. And if we expanded that 15% to 2 days a week, it even dwarfs Duke switching to renewable sources altogether. It was a tough idea for many to swallow. Pun. And nearly sunk the entire plan, which had to be ratified by council. The Enquirer's rabid editorial writer, Peter Bronson, who many of you will remember, he railed against the Climate Protection Action Plan, saying there's no such thing as global warming. Even if there is, humans have no effect on it. And even if they do, he's going to fight this plan with a hamburger as his shield and a fork as his spear. So it's pretty clear what aspect of the plan he hated the most. But I think it was Larry Falcon's informed support and some council members who had vegetarian children, which permitted the plan to pass in 2008 and made Cincinnati, you ready for this? Made Cincinnati the first city in the world to recommend reduced meat and dairy consumption to slow climate change.
Yes, Cincinnati.
Portopolis, yeah. Almost immediately, cities around the world and in the U.S. began emulating that recommendation, several citing Cincinnati's climate protection plan as their stimulus. Shortly after that, the name was changed to the Green Cincinnati Plan, and it was decided to create a sixth task team to create food-related recommendations and add to the plan. And that was the Food Action Task Team. In its second year, I was appointed chair. Right away, our team submitted 4 new recommendations, passed unanimously by Lori Quinlivan's Quality of Life Committee, 3 of which were also passed by council to be added to the Green Cincinnati Plan. But they never appeared in the plan. And I've learned recently that, surprisingly, they were prevented by Mayor Mallory. A 4th, called the Healthier School Meals recommendation, on which I had worked particularly hard, was removed from council's agenda by the mayor the morning that council was supposed to vote on it. Removed from their agenda. So that also never reached the plan. The mayor's office then issued the following statement. Quote, "The mayor has been publicly opposed to the components of the Green Cincinnati Plan that speak to a vegetarian diet. He believes that dietary restrictions are entirely a personal choice and government plays no role in this area." I had a long conversation in the hallway with him after this, and I don't have time to tell you about it, but it was pretty enlightening, or the opposite of enlightening in some ways. That was more than a bit disappointing from a man who positioned himself as the environmental mayor. After the Green Cincinnati Plan passed, I attempted to inform the mayor and council members about many of the other environmental problems associated with meat. That same 2006 UN FAO report additionally found meat to be, quote, "one of the 2 or 3 most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems, including land degradation, climate change, air pollution, water shortage, water pollution, loss of biodiversity," and saw, quote, "an urgent need to develop suitable institutional policy and frameworks at local, national, and international levels." But with no likelihood of further progress, I soon dissolved the food task team. Eating less meat or even no meat benefits not only the health of the earth, but also has positive impacts on human health, and of course that of animals. I'll be happy to get into that if there's any time, but first I'd like to update you about the science related to meat and climate change. In 2009, 2 environmental specialists for the World Bank, Robert Goodland and Jeff Arhag, rechecked and reconsidered current data and came up with a different conclusion as to the percentage attributable to anthropogenic greenhouse gas production contributed by meat, and published their findings in the magazine World Watch. Their figure, you ready? 51%. More than half, the majority, caused by human activity attributed to meat and dairy. So why is meat, and it should be repeated, dairy, such a problem? Well, there are many reasons. The biological reality of ruminant digestion is that significant quantities of methane are released, mostly in cow burps, not cow farts as people like to think, escaping into the atmosphere and trapping heat with impressive efficiency. Over the first 20 years, 86 times more potent than CO2. Atmospheric concentrations of methane have increased at 5 times the rate of CO2 in the last century, largely due to the expansion of our meat-based diet. And the problem's worse than most thought. A 2014 study by 15 of the world's top climate change scientists, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, found that due to inaccurate measurements and measuring methods, the U.S. is actually producing 50% more methane than previously estimated. The principal source, they said, is meat production. The abstract states, quote, "Our study indicates that emissions due to ruminants and manure are up to twice the magnitude of existing inventories." Soon, these figures are likely to spike as thawing permafrost releases methane that's stored in the frozen organic material below, unless we can slow things down. Second, no matter the farming method, livestock manure produces nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a heat trapper that's 300 times more potent than CO2. Livestock in the United States generates 1 billion tons of manure a year, accounting for 65% of the planet's anthropogenic nitrous oxide. Free-range gas-fed organic husbandry doesn't help. In fact, a 2009 study from the University of Halifax, Nova Scotia, reported in Science News, surprised even its authors, who found that grass-grazed cattle contribution to greenhouse gases is 50% higher than cattle trapped and confined in animal feeding operations known as CAFOs. That means confined animal feeding operations. As Environment Michael Tidwell noted, writing for the far from radical Audubon magazine, not notably focused on food production, quote, "Here's the inconvenient truth about meat and dairy. If you eat them, regardless of their origin and how they were produced, you significantly contribute to climate change, period." The reason seems to be that much more food is consumed by grazed cattle to achieve the same amount of meat. For one thing, they live longer, resulting in higher methane and nitrous oxide emissions. And there are higher grass trampling rates and the increased land area. And there's 4 or 5 other reasons, but who knew? A study at Carnegie Mellon University found that only 5% of the greenhouse emissions related to food come from transporting it to market. Quote, "You can have a much bigger impact by shifting just 1 day a week from meat and dairy to anything else than by going local every day of the year." So that's part of why I moved from the transportation team to create a food task team. Third, the means of production and transportation and storage required to feed meat to so many people have caused huge areas of pristine rainforest to be raised, far less for timber than to create pasture for grazing cows, and to a lesser degree land to grow corn and soybeans to feed those cows. And there's the energy required to slaughter, package, transport, and store meat, all requiring refrigeration. It should be mentioned that cows also breathe out CO2 in abundance, despite last year India's Rajasthan education minister defending sacred cows by proclaiming that the cow is the only animal which both inhales and exhales oxygen. So we don't have to worry about cows. Dairy cows alone, while barely 4% of the human population, exhale nearly as much CO2 as people on the planet. And for humans, that's 2,000 million tons CO2 annually. CO2 sticks around in the atmosphere for 100 years or more. The very quality of methane that makes it so damaging also points to a quick and effective way to halt global warming by significantly reducing anthropogenic methane. Powerful though it may be, methane has a net life cycle of 8.4 years in the atmosphere. And after that, of course, it partly breaks down into CO2, but that's a reduced global warming potential, especially in longer time frames. So any reduction in methane can quickly translate into reducing the warming effect. CO2, as I said, here's repetition, sticks around for nearly a century in the atmosphere. Arctic permafrost, there's another repetition, okay. Anyway, once it melts, the amount of methane and CO2 stored is going to spike and push us over the tipping point. The carbon sink of the Amazon rainforest is in danger of being lost. Large proportions of the planet will become unlivable, while increasing population crowds out the rest. We still have sufficient land to feed the population, but not if we keep eating large amounts of meat. If meat consumption were to drop by half in the next 10 years, anthropogenic greenhouse gas production could drop by 25%. In the next 20 years, and that combined with change in energy production could conceivably avoid catastrophic climate change, slowing and even reversing global warming. As Tara Garnett at Britain's Food Climate Research Network explains, quote, "If we want to fight global warming through the food we buy, then one thing's clear. We have to drastically reduce the meat we consume. She says the real question is not even organic content or its travel costs, but, quote, did it come from an animal or did it not come from an animal? But aren't we meant to eat meat? Isn't the caveman diet the natural way for humans to eat? Aren't we naturally carnivores? Well, the caveman diet as a hunter is largely a myth. Examination of the stomach contents of humans from Paleolithic times shows an almost entirely plant food diet. Meat was an opportunistic addition and also sometimes a necessity in a frozen land. But our physiognomy isn't set up for large meat consumption. We lack the ripping claws and the tearing teeth of a carnivore, and especially the short intestinal tract necessary for rapid digestion and elimination of meat before it putrefies in our system. Isn't that a happy? Plant food passes through our intestines in a few hours. Meat can take as long as 3 days. What we most closely resemble physiologically, and what we should be described as is essentially omnivorous herbivores. And the omnivorous part is mostly subject to choice. The anomaly here, which many people will point out, is that we have developed a need for the vitamin B12, which is produced only by bacteria, and that's most readily accomplished by eating meat and dairy, as our hygienic lives provide us with very little bacteria. Also, relatively small percentages of humans, mostly those in colder climates, particularly Northern Europeans, have developed a tolerance for the milk of a different species, something no other species does, except some domesticated cats. Cow's milk is naturally formulated for calves, and only while they are very young and dependent on their mothers. Most humans become ill attempting to drink it, the vast majority of humans on the planet. So what has become the standard American diet, SAD, an interesting acronym which is SAD, is indeed sad. The American legal scholar and Nicholas D. Katzenbach Scholar of Law and Philosophy at Rutgers School of Law, Gary L. Francione, put it this way, quote, most of our animal uses are transparently frivolous and cannot be described as involving any necessity. For example, we kill billions of animals every year for food. It's certainly not necessary for us to eat animal flesh, dairy, eggs, or other animal products. Indeed, the evidence is mounting that animal foods are detrimental to our health. Moreover, animal agriculture is an ecological disaster. The only justification we have for using animals in this way is that we are accustomed to and enjoy the taste of meat and animal products. I would assert beyond that, ooh, wow, that we are effectively addicted to meat, that altering the behavior for the majority of Americans will be far more difficult than stopping smoking. A meal just isn't a meal without meat. A favorite quote of mine comes from that learned Alaskan sage, Sarah Palin, who wrote, quote, if God hadn't meant us to eat animals, he wouldn't have made them out of meat. I considered writing to her children, warning them to be extra careful around Mom in the kitchen. But eating animals is dangerous enough. For over 35 years, the Food and Drug Commissioners and the FDA's National Advisory Committee have been warning about major public health threat of widespread antibiotic use on confined feedlot cows, and recommending that the practice be eliminated. And now, unfortunately, it's too late, as the resultant superbugs have so undermined human medicine that we haven't the antibiotics to stop them. Add E. coli and other bacterial infections produced by the meat industry practices, mad cow disease and its possible links to Alzheimer's, and the effects on child fertility of the meat and dairy industry's widespread use of steroids and hormones to mature animals more quickly, where an onset of human puberty now results in girls as young as 7 becoming mothers. In just 25 years, the mean age of onset of menstruation in American girls has dropped from 13 to 10 for Caucasians and to 9 for African Americans. In the 19th century, the average was 17 years old. A third of all girls in the U.S. now begin puberty by the age of 8. These changes are also linked to increased amounts of animal protein in Western diets. In addition, eating the flesh of animals is the most inefficient way to feed people. Using land and water to raise plants to feed animals for us to eat is 50 times less efficient than eating the plants directly. And that affects starvation and water shortages on the planets. Ecologist David Pimentel of Cornell's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences says, if the grain currently fed to livestock in the United States were consumed directly by people, the number of people it could feed would be over 800 million. That's the United States only. The populations of the US, Germany, Britain, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, and Scandinavia, Russia, and then some. Britain is a net importer of food and unable to feed its population on the food it raises. Yet, were it to use its cultivatable land to grow food for its human population instead of mostly for its cows and sheep, it could feed not only its population, but that of the United States as well. So 2/3 of all agricultural land, 30% of the entire land mass on the planet is now dedicated entirely to raising animals for food, while only 8% is used for food to feed humans directly. If the rest of the world ate the way we do in the US, we'd need another Earth to stay alive. And increasingly, the rest of the world is eating the way we do. If they continue to copy us, we'll need to change how we eat if they keep copying us. Similar inefficiencies apply to water and energy use compared to plant-based diets. Nearly half the fresh water used in the US is used in raising animals for food. Watering the feed the food crabs, interesting. Drinking water for the animals, water to clean up their waste and remains. The meat-heavy standard American diet requires 4,200 gallons of water daily, while a person on a vegan diet requires 300 gallons of water daily. It takes 100 times more water to produce a pound of beef than a pound of wheat. And the water pollution associated with meat production is a massive problem. In the US, the runoff from factory farms pollutes our waterways more than all other industrial sources combined. It's even causing male fish to grow ovaries and is responsible for a massive 10,000 square mile area where the Mississippi Delta empties into the Gulf of Mexico that's known simply as the dead zone, because nothing lives there. And dead zones are multiplying around the planet. A single fast food, meat-based meal for a family of 4 consumes as much planetary water as one person taking daily showers every day for an entire year. So if you went to McDonald's 4 times last week, that's how much water you consume. Also, the amount of energy used to produce meat is enormous, 20 times as much as that required to produce a calorie from plant protein. And livestock outnumbers people on the planet by a factor of 3. So it consumes vast amounts of resources, pollution, waste, 10 times the waste that humans generate in the US. And all that CO2 they're breathing out and belching and pooping methane and nitrous oxide, if there were a more or less normal-sized CAFO in Hamilton County, animal feedlot, it would produce more waste than the entire of Cincinnati produces. Of course, the difference is all that waste is untreated. So back to climate change. One study in the UK shows that adopting a meat-free diet for just 1 day a week would save the UK 13 megatons of carbon dioxide, a greater savings than taking 6 million cars off Britain's roads, or replacing 1 billion incandescent light bulbs. In the US, that would translate to greater carbon savings than taking 30 million cars off the road. So I timed this three times, but we did start about 10 minutes late. A 2015 study from Oxford University found that if most people simply use healthier eating guidelines, this isn't becoming vegetarians, just less meat, more plant, greenhouse gas emissions would be 29% lower in 2050 than if nothing else changed. If people stopped eating red meat and poultry, the 2050 emissions would be 55% lower. And if they all went vegan, emissions would be 70% lower. That's incredible. Additionally, up to $70 billion in healthcare-related costs in Britain alone would be saved. Brent Kim, an agriculture and climate researcher at Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, commented, "This study reinforces a glowing body of evidence behind a crucial message. For a high probability of keeping global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius, we need urgent and dramatic shifts toward plant-based diets." This is not talked about very much. Recent studies at Chalmers University in Gothenburg, Sweden, published in Climate Change, the journal, as well as other studies in Cambridge and Aberdeen in the UK, reinforce this position even more stridently, announcing that the only possible way for the planet to avoid a 2-degree Celsius rise from pre-industrial levels, and that's why they considered the tipping point the UN determined that must not be exceeded to avoid catastrophic and irreversible climate change, cannot be achieved through technology. It can be achieved only if people stop eating meat and dairy. We never hear about this. Reductions by 50% or more in ruminant, here's a quote, reductions by 50% or more in ruminant meat, that's beef and sheep, consumption are most likely unavoidable if we are to meet the targets. These are not studies that were funded by the non-existent vast vegan lobby. That 2009 report in World Watch realized this even back then, asserting that the world's best chance for achieving timely disaster-averting climate change was eating less meat. In a recent blog on the report, its co-author, Robert Goodland, wrote that replacing livestock products with alternatives, quote, would have far more rapid effects on greenhouse gas emissions and their atmospheric concentrations, and thus on the rate the climate is warming, than actions to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy. Quote, this quote's a killer. Quote, the entire goal of today's international climate objectives can be achieved by replacing just 1/4 of today's least eco-friendly food products with better alternatives. The entire goal. There are a lot of studies out there that have been funded by the Meat and Dairy Council that say he's crazy, but he stands by, he's returned to his facts many times, he stands by them. Unfortunately, even stupidly, many environmental groups still stubbornly shy away from discussing the environmental problems related to meat and dairy, as though vegetarianism were a dangerous cult religion or some sort of Santa Claus disguised cancer that'll seize you when you're sleeping and grows while you're awake. Most of them receive considerable funding from the meat and dairy industries to keep it that way. How many people here have seen Al Gore's Film an Inconvenient Truth or the sequel, or an Inconvenient Sequel? Lots of you, okay. There was a moment in the original film as the camera-mounted helicopter passed over the burning rainforest when I thought to myself, now is when he'll have to talk about me. But he didn't. The world's equatorial rainforest, the life-giving lungs of the planet and its major carbon sink are being raised at a rate of 50 acres per minute. Tens of millions of acres annually. Every year, Brazil alone destroys an area of rainforest the size of Nebraska every year. And why? As I mentioned, the principal answer is meat, especially beef, either to create more pasture land for grazing or more farming land to grow corn and soy to feed the cattle. But without the protective forest, the soil cannot long sustain either practice and quickly becomes dry, necessitating moving on to new Nebraskas of destruction. E.O. Wilson, a biologist at Harvard, has called it the Earth's greatest extinction since the end of the age of dinosaurs. But this one, we caused. It's been estimated that just a pound of meat eliminates, that's that same 4 meals at McDonald's for one person, eliminates 200 square feet of rainforest. Every hamburger made from rainforest-raised beef requires an area of rainforest the size of a home kitchen to be destroyed. The truth is inconvenient for Al Gore because although the first film showed his family giving up tobacco farming after the lung cancer death of his sister, you may have noticed in both films a sign hanging at the end of the Gore driveway. It's the metal silhouette of a Black Angus cow. This is not a family business the family has been prepared to give up. Nor is eating meat a practice Americans generally are prepared to give up. Eating meat is a habit, an addiction, more difficult to break than smoking, so ingrained as it is in our psyches and our guts. The elephant in the Gore living room, as in so many others, is a cow. Vegetarianism is not a new phenomenon. The ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras was a vegetarian, and until the mid-19th century, people who abstained from meat were known as Pythagoreans. Famous followers of Pythagoras' diet were Leonardo da Vinci, Benjamin Franklin, George Bernard Shaw, Albert Einstein, some very smart people in history. The word vegetarian was coined in 1847 to give a name to what was then just a small movement in England. Vegan, a term meaning abstention from all animal products, was also coined there. So others who've made that choice to stop consuming meat, Abe Lincoln, this is alphabetically by A's, I'll stop before we get to C. Abe Lincoln, Albert Schweitzer, Aristotle, Benjamin Franklin, Benjamin Stock, Bill Clinton, Bill Maher, Billie Jean King, Bob Dylan, Bonnie Raitt, Buddha, Carl Lewis, Charles Darwin. Skipping ahead, there's Edison, Emerson, Epicurus, Newton, Plato, Socrates, Susan B. Anthony. Nary a dummy among them. Oh, yeah, and Al Gore is also on the list. One of these non-dummies, Albert Einstein, made this prediction 100 years ago or so. Nothing will benefit human health and increase the chances of survival on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet. And one of my favorites, the pithy George Bernard Shaw, in 1940 wrote, I love this, the average longevity of a meat eater is 63. I'm on the verge of 85 and still work as hard as ever. I've lived quite long enough and am trying to die, but I simply cannot do it. I know a single beefsteak would finish me off, but I can't bring myself to swallow it. I'm oppressed with the dread of living forever. That is the only disadvantage of vegetarianism. So I had not intended in this talk to talk much about human health implications, but I'll just mention this. The American Dietetic Association published this statement. Not only is mortality from coronary heart disease lower in vegetarians than non-vegetarians, but vegetarian diets have also been successful in arresting coronary heart disease. Scientific data suggests relationships between a vegetarian diet and reduced risk for obesity, coronary artery disease, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, and some other types of cancer. These understandings, once arcane, are becoming mainstream, yet never taught to physicians. Physicians get maybe an hour of nutritional training in their careers. Nurses get a few more hours. So I recognize the V words are not for everyone, and not everyone can do them. We are not all the same or live under the same conditions. Nomadic tribes people in Tibet or Inuit in Alaska could not survive as vegetarians. On the other hand, large portions of the U.S. population are lactose intolerant. In fact, the majority. Only Northern Europeans and Northern Indians can handle dairy. But Native American Indians are 100% lactose intolerant. Nevertheless, in the U.S., meat and dairy lobbies have subsidized production to the point where a family can eat less initially expensively at McDonald's than buying vegetables and grains at the market. And milk is pushed at nearly every student in schools. And as I mentioned, the meat and dairy industry funds the major U.S. environmental organizations, or maybe I didn't mention that. They've had little to say on this subject. In fact, the Sierra Club's one of the worst. But you have to remember, the Sierra Club's historic base perhaps is hunters and ranchers. If the FDA were to create a food subsidy pyramid, you remember the food nutrition pyramids? It's now a plate. It would be almost a perfect inversion of the healthy food pyramid. So one thing we can do is to lobby in the Farm Bill to change what we subsidize. Subsidize what's healthy. Let the other things reach their true costs in the marketplace. That would be, in a capitalistic society, that would be the most effective way to affect healthier change. If the actual costs of meat and milk were what we pay at the store, a plant-based diet would be a fraction of the cost of meat, as it is still in many parts of the world, and if we measure things correctly, as it is here too in the long run. But it's a hard sell. Standard American diet is meat and dairy heavy. It's not a meal if it doesn't have meat. Republicans got meat added to the new federal dairy guidelines when they saw that the scientists who created the guidelines had removed it. They also acted to prevent the food guidelines from taking into consideration our dietary habits' environmental effects. So they got those removed too, particularly because of those that affected climate change. Nevertheless, the message is getting out. An article in Forbes last year titled 9 Things You Can Do About Climate Change listed as number 1, becoming a vegetarian, or better yet, a vegan, adding, if you do it only for 1 day a week, it will still be the most important action you can take to affect climate change. And just recently, I saw some charts. Somebody mentioned Ollie. The World Resources Institute had some charts projected in a climate change forum that I participated in an Ollie class, which surprised even me. One of them said, quote, if cattle were their own nation, the cattle nation would be the world's 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter behind the US and China. Another calculated, quote, if the world's 2 billion high consumers of meat cut their meat and dairy consumption by 40%, 2 billion people cutting their consumption by 40%, it would save 168 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, more than 3 times the entire global emissions of 2009. Why we don't look at this as a solution, I don't know. It's seldom that such enormous problems have simple solutions. This is one that does. We can tackle climate change without inventing new cars or spending billions of dollars on mass transit or trillions on new forms of energy, although all of those are desirable and should be pursued. We can begin eating less meat tomorrow. That's something nearly any of us can do. With no technological advances, personal choice enacted on a large scale can literally save the world. It needs to become a movement. I'll close by saying simply that I encourage as many of you who are able to shift your diet from fauna to more flora. It's the single most effective and least expensive, most efficient, least difficult, most important single action you can take to protect the health of the planet, inclusive of all life on it. You merely need to decide where to stick your fork. Thank you for listening, and we can do about 10 minutes of questions since we started 10 minutes late. If I can answer them, if my memory allows.
I have a question right here. So is the problem mostly beef versus all meats? Is there like a difference in harmfulness between like beef versus chicken, seafood?
Yeah, beef is by far the biggest problem for a whole variety of reasons. Chickens are about, both in terms of water usage and land mass that's consumed and energy and everything else, chickens are less than 1/10 of the climate problem that beef is. So, chicken feed. Lamb is about 20%, you know. Ruminants are a bigger problem than non-ruminants, but yeah, if you just put beef on the shelf, you know, a can of Span for emergencies or something. Goat is close to sheep. It's not as much of a problem. Is a goat a ruminant? I think it is, isn't it? I don't know either. And fish are actually a problem too. Fish are probably on the same par with chicken. But still, if you just go with fish and chicken and avoid most of the other stuff, you're making a huge contribution.
I had a discussion with my cousin yesterday. He's been a vegan for years. And a major reason...
He's still alive?
Yeah, he's 110. A major reason for him is the cruelty to the animals. He's a member of PETA, and that's a major reason also, in addition to what you said.
When they do surveys of, I may have even written it down someplace, when they do surveys of why people become vegetarians or vegan, number one on the list is human health. But as you get to obviously younger and younger people like kids, their big reason is they love the animals, you know. The number two reason is animal welfare and so forth. The number three reason is environmental, and I've forgotten, oh, the fourth reason is economic. No, come on, only two questions. Was I that comprehensive? There's one.
I got one here.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
What is your diet?
My diet is about, I became a vegetarian a long time ago, and it wasn't for any of these reasons, and it wasn't on the list. It was because I fell in love with a vegetarian.
Oh, there we go.
And that was in England, and that was in 1970. And she was a model, and she turned out to be the national spokesperson for the anti-vivisection movement. I'd never even heard of that word, you know. But that's an animal rights, animal cruelty thing, and it just seemed as though, you know, it's like, it would be like smoking and living with a non-smoker and always blowing smoke in their face. It made no sense for me to sit at a table at a meal with her while I eat meat and she can't, and so I changed. But then about 15 years ago, I had my head in my refrigerator, and I was looking around and I was going, oh, I gotta get more eggs, I gotta get more milk, I gotta get more cheese. And I was having like gallbladder problems at the moment, but I didn't know it. And a voice inside me said, no you don't. And I had a little argument, you know, with that voice. I said, yes I do. Look, I'm out of milk and I'm out of eggs and I'm out of cheese and I have to get some more. And the voice said, no you don't. And this went on about 5 times, and I thought, I'm absolutely going crazy. I need to stop living alone, you know. And finally, I gave in, and I said, no, I don't. And from that time on, I was mostly vegan. Every now and then, friends go out for pizza or something, and I don't want to be the one guy that, I don't know what it is, but, and I guess I miss cheese. Cheese was the hardest, honest to God. But I guess I've been 90% vegan for 15 years.
Just a comment. I was raised in eastern Pennsylvania, and there were 5 kids in my family, and both my parents came up through the Depression. So they did everything to stretch a dollar, you know how that is. So my father was a hunter. So we ate pheasant, we ate rabbits, we ate fish all the time. He was always going fishing. And to this day, when I go in and have my cholesterol screened, my doctors say, it is incredible how low your numbers are. Because as a child, I didn't grow up on beef. And if we did have beef, it was ground meat and it had oatmeal in it and zucchini and carrots and had everything to stretch it for a family of 7. And so there's long-term effects to what happens. And you know, our children here. Right?
So are you recommending Cincinnatians eat a lot of Gouda?
Well, you know, I like it. I don't know if anybody else does, but you know, it's it's smart. That doesn't mean, and I'm gonna tell everybody, I ran a New York Marathon and I needed, after I was done, I had to have a steak. So just something, it's something that's still
You
out
might,
there.
you might like to know the top ultra marathoners, not just marathons, but the ultra most of them are vegetarians.
Yeah.
It just seems to burn better for that
Well,
long.
for months ahead of time, I was a vegetarian, and let me tell you, I had more than enough carbohydrates. But I eventually, I avoid as much as possible, but still, I don't.
Yeah, and people who are afraid of it because they think, oh, I'll lose my aggression, I'll lose my strength, I'll lose my, whatever, my speed or something. Like, for instance, Carl Lewis, who for years was the fastest human alive, was vegetarian. There are Bengals football players who are vegetarians. It's weird. And do you remember Freedom the Cow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Well, so I wrote a book about freedom. I haven't found a publisher yet, but when they wanted to bring freedom out for the Reds for opening day parade and the cow was having nothing to do with it, I managed to persuade the Reds ballpark to have veggie burgers, veggie dogs, vegan hot dogs, as well as the hot dogs that they had. So that was a big victory, but when I tried to get the Bengals to do veggie burgers, they weren't having it. But, one step at a time.
I'd just like to thank you especially, William, for your excellent lecture today. And I also remember as a student at Antioch University back in the 70s, I took a nutrition course, and one of the books was called A Diet for a Small Planet.
Yeah.
In that book, they talked about those issues you brought up, about the huge amount of grazing land required and the wastewater issues around animal raising.
Was that Francis Moore-Lappé?
Francis Moore-Lappé, that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is that you have some wonderful ideas today. And one way I found that I've been able to actualize some of those is my former gastroenterologist, Dr. Alan Safdie, he's been a vegan for many years, and he publishes a newsletter that's free. So the next time I'll come, I'll bring you his email, and he tells you about how you can make transitions to a meatless world. He talks about the effects of alcohol on you and a lot of other things, and it's been very helpful for me to help me get my body aligned again. So I'm working hard on that. So
Thank you.
Got another
Thank
year.
you. And I don't want to be like an evangelist for vegetarianism. I'm really trying to talk about a very specific issue that has to do with global warming, and the connection between meat and dairy. But yeah, okay.
We were talking about the different meats and fishes. What's the impact of pork and turkey, relative impact?
Well, turkey is closer to chicken, and pork is somewhat higher up the scale. I would think after the ruminants, pork is the next one to consider moving away from. And I'm sorry I don't have the exact. I didn't look that one up before I came tonight. I used to know all those things just in my head, and I could rattle them off, but no more.
May I?
Sure.
I just want to say, I haven't had a hamburger in about 6 years. I can't bear to think about eating beef, but have I got to give up yogurt?
I eat a lot of yogurt, but it isn't actually made with milk. It isn't made with cow's milk. It isn't even made with animal milk. And a lot of it's very good. I like it. It's just a question of the fermentation. I want it for the flora that it puts into my intestines, And I just read recently, this is kind of interesting, the French butchers are almost on strike because the French Parliament wanted to pass a recommendation that everybody do 1 day a week meatless. And the butchers went ballistic, And they also want to stop all the corporations that are making meat analogs and dairy analogs, from using words that they consider that belong to them, like steak or milk or things like that. So we're in for a tough go. As this becomes more of an awareness, there'll be a really powerful pushback.
you buy non-dairy yogurt?
Anywhere. Kroger, Clifton Market, anywhere.
What's it called? What's it called?
Oh, there's several different people who make it. So Delicious is one. S.O. Yeah, you just go, like, it used to be that markets would have a special section for healthy foods and stuff. They stopped doing that because they sell more money, they sell more food, putting it in with everything else, so you have to go through the whole market to find the stuff you need, if you like meat. So just go where they keep the yogurt and look for a few of them that say, they probably say yogurt alternative, something like that.
Or they'll specifically say made out of almond milk, or they say what it's made
Yeah,
out of.
they'll tell you that it's almond milk or coconut milk or soy or whatever, because some people have allergies to nuts or to soy or to other things.
Then I looked up goats, they are ruminants.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Do you remember when
Smaller ruminants.
Right. Do you remember when Oprah talked about hamburgers? That they
Oh my God.
sued her out there? Yeah.
Oprah had, not John
Oprah
Roberts.
knows everything, you know.
Oprah had Howard Lyman. Oprah had Howard Lyman on the show, who's known as the Mad Cowboy, and that was his handle. And he, like John Robbins, who wrote one of the books I mentioned, was from a meat family. Ranchers. Robbins was from the Baskin and Robbins family, and they both became vegetarians. And Lyman was talking to her about the dangers of hamburgers, you know, her favorite thing. And she, on the show, after he was there, she proclaimed she's never going to eat another hamburger. And boy, the meat industry went ballistic. And they sued the crap out of her. And they have an awful lot of money, even more than Oprah. And she ended up settling with them, and she's never been allowed to say anything against meat or dairy ever since.
So money is the why things will change, like it is in most areas. It's about bucks. It's about
Money, and you know, there's also a religious thing where there's this idea of man was given dominion over the animals, and that means we can do whatever the hell we want with them, chop them into pieces, you know, whatever. And there's just this sense, you ain't murking it, you ain't eating meat, you know. There's a lot of things that are ingrained in us about it.
money pushes that too, though, right? I mean, it's
Oh, sure. Money pushes everything.
My partner repeated, I've got a really loud voice. You had mentioned before that Native Americans do not consume dairy products? Or is it a genetic thing, or?
Well, if you want to call it genetic, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
generally speaking, humans are not, we're not, the only milk we're supposed to have comes from our mothers, and then we get weaned. And that's supposed to be it.
Okay.
So when we start drinking the milk designed for the infants of another species, we're really testing our bodies. But for humans that lived, you know, way in the north where nothing was growing, they, you know, you couldn't ask an Eskimo to just have a vegetarian diet.
Exactly. They would never have experienced, you know, yes, they ate meat, but they didn't milk cows or things like that, so they probably never experienced dairy until modern times.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure they knew that buffalo give milk, you know, but for some reason or another, they're one of the ethnic groups that's 100% lactose intolerant.
Wow.
We'll take just one more, I think.
Oh, I don't know if this is a question, but we heard somebody here speak before and say that most humans are lactose intolerant except Northern Europe.
Yeah, that was me about 40 minutes ago. Yeah, and of course, Northern Europeans have been pretty much calling the shots for a long time. So, you know, we push milk at kids. There was an experiment done in Wisconsin where a school that was called Central Appleton Alternative School was a last-ditch school for kids who were having thrown out of every other school. It was their last chance. And the principal was approached by somebody who said, "Can I try something with your school and change the food?" And she said, "You know, knock yourself out. Who's paying for it?" And he said, "I will." She said, "Knock yourself out." And he replaced the soft drinks with water. He put fresh fruit in the hallways as they're walking from class to class. He made he made turkey lasagna instead of beef lasagna. He used vegetarian cheese on it and stuff like that. And he stopped giving milk to every student. There were some students whose parents said, my kid has to drink milk, so they had one of those milk machines in the cafeteria where you could get your own if you wanted it. Within 1 week, for the first few days the kids complained, but within 1 week, the whole feeling in the school shifted. And teachers, by the end of a month, teachers that had given them their retirement or early retirement had changed their minds. The kids suddenly were attentive and were interested in learning. And the teachers suddenly felt like teachers again. And all those problems have gone up again. Just the food. I tried to do it in Cincinnati with the same people who did it in Wisconsin. And I had all the council people lined up. I had a school lined up in Bond Hill that was very similar to the same school, had the same kind of problems. I talked to everyone who worked there. It was ready to go. And the funding people, they were on their way here, and that night, somewhere in Indiana, they were watching TV, and they saw Bill and Melinda Gates giving money to schools in Chicago, and they looked at each other, a husband and wife, they looked at each other and they said, honey, we gotta go to Chicago. And they turned around, it didn't show up into Cincinnati, and it never happened here. All right.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will follow that up with a milk program that we had in the Philippines, where people in the Philippines were not allowed, were given all of this free milk. Well, they couldn't eat it because they can't, so they fed it to the pigs. And I would get some of the leftover milk for us as a family, and well, those days are gone. But it was interesting. All of this milk that we sent over there for their children and for their milk was just given to the pigs. And that's,
It was just our concept of what they needed.
what we wanted for them. It was very sad. Okay, so wonderful things. Now, I do have a naturalization ceremony coming up on Friday, this Friday. I have a brand new naturalization ceremony happening at 10 o'clock in the morning that was not on the original schedule, and I do need to have somebody go with me. So if there's somebody who would like to do a naturalization ceremony with me, please see me after this meeting. I would like to do that, and there's one more meeting. It's going to be on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, so we'd have to zoom out of here at 1 o'clock, zoom on down there to be there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, good. Hey.
I have to check my schedule, but I like that.
Woo! We got somebody for that Tuesday.
When is the one you just mentioned?
This
coming up?
Tuesday, yeah,
What date is it?
Friday,
the 6th.
Oh,
this Friday.
Friday.
This Friday, this coming Friday.
And then,
When is it Tuesday?
The other one that's been put on there is the, it's like the 31st or something. It's a Tuesday.
I'll go with that.
Okay, well, okay, and with that,
I just remembered an announcement I meant to do at the beginning. Since I was speaking, I forgot I had an announcement. It's not really, but next Saturday, the Free Inquiry Group and Tri-State Freethinkers and a bunch of other groups are going to do a protest at the Ark Encounter. Giant thing that costs billions of dollars and is anti-science and all that stuff. And they're going to start at 10 o'clock, and then there's going to be a march, a 45-minute march at noon. And I wish I knew how to tell you how to get in touch with them, but you can get in touch with me, and I can put you in touch with them if you'd like to go.
The date again?
Shouldn't help.
Next Saturday. I don't know.
We have 7.
Where is that? Williams?
We could just put Jim Held
Yeah, you could go to just Tri-State Freethinkers online. That's easy. And or Free Inquiry Group or something, but it's wherever that is. It has this very erotic name. It's somewhere between Beaver Lick and Big Bone Lick. That's how I remember it.
Thank you. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we have food to take care of. Get the food out of here. Thank you very much for coming. You are a wonderful, wonderful audience. Thank you.
You know, and I heard about this about 5 years after it happened. And I called up the principal, Lou Ann Cohen, what's her name? And I said, is this just a bunch of hype that, you know, I read about in vegetarian magazines and stuff, or is this real? She said, let me tell you something. We have to fill out forms every year with the state of Wisconsin about behavior of the kids, and it starts with truancy and lateness and graffiti and fighting in the halls and goes all the way through to bringing weapons to school and suicides. We had a police officer constantly on duty in the school, you know. She said for the 2 years, because they ran out of money, for the 2 years we did this program, I was able, and she said nothing else changed. For those 2 years, I was able to put zeros in every category. And the only thing that changed was the food. That's a miracle. You know, it's as close to an actual miracle as anything you can imagine. And then the whole school system of Appleton, 200 and something schools, decided to do that too, because it worked so well at this school. But then the money ran out, and then the food providers, Sodexo and people like that, they pledged that they would keep that up, but they chipped away for at it every year, and